And so what kind of activities does AI Collaborative kind of do and sort of support and so on?
So we'll talk about it in a second. Like the biggest thing we're doing right now, so I'm envoy for everything to do with public interest AI for the AI Action Summit. The work that we're a small operational philanthropic organization. So public interest AI is one of our core areas. I'll talk about it in a second. The other one is the impact of labor on artificial intelligence. And we also started out looking at the impact of AI on elections, which is a little bit less the topic for today. But in the run up to 2024, with a number of elections around the world, we were looking at that as well.
Yeah, and actually that's going to be the next session. We're going to be exploring kind of some of those questions around kind of truth in AI and the sort of sociological kind of impacts there. Public interest AI. So break that down a bit for me in terms of what you see the kind of component parts and I suppose what it is that you would like to see sort of achieved through the smart use of these technologies.
Yeah, so to break it down, we start with the analysis of the problem, right? And we've been doing this with a number of different partners in the run-up to the summit. I think one of the first problems is a question of fragmentation. It's not for lack of public interest projects. So by public interest, I mean, looking at areas where there are fewer or no market incentives to focus on, and looking at areas where there's potentially market failures. So we need and want to shape the market in different ways. I think many of you in the room have been working on the issue of collective data governance for a long time. So how it's possible to have large-scale data sets that balance highly sensitive data, for example, health data on patient treatment outcomes, with looking and analyzing it collectively so we can finally cure devastating diseases such as particular forms of cancer. That is not an area we've moved enough on. So this is what I mean when I talk about public interest in that sense. So fragmentation, I think, is a problem. We have a number of different projects, but none of them are coordinated or integrated in a way to get anywhere close to the second problem, which is a lack of scale. We lack scale. The private sector has scale in these areas. What does it look like? How can we match that? The third area we're looking at, and this is going to be another big cross-cutting issue together with public interest for the summit, is the impact on climate and nature. What is the link between AI and sustainability? And how do we do that better, and how can we look to the future? So that's part of the problem analysis. And where we've got to in terms of what it means, to your question, we're looking at 4 fundamental pillars or building blocks. One of them I just mentioned is data. In our analysis, data is going to be much more of a bottleneck than compute in the years to come. Compute's important. I don't mean to underestimate it in any ways. But partly, one of the reasons we need the compute is because we're trying to turn coal into diamonds. So we need to apply that brute force. We have to focus on getting high quality data sets which are legally acquired, which respect IP in different ways, and are accessible and available. So that's one. The second one, and this is another big focus of the summit, is around openness in artificial intelligence. So including, but not limited to, open source. So I'm very happy to talk about that more if we have time. The third one is around model development. The focus of the summit, and certainly the focus on the public interest AI piece, is less on the bleeding edge of the frontier, where there's a lot of good work that's been done, started by the UK and others. It's more on small model development. As you know, the small models are not that small, but we're interested in them for a couple of reasons. One of them is a lesser environmental footprint, and the other one is having them really finely tuned to societal problems. And then the fourth one is accountability. We need to work directly with the communities that are impacted. That sounds a little bit theoretical. I'll give you a very practical example. On the data piece, on health data, it means working directly with patient organizations, people who are affected by the disease and have a degree of trust and legitimacy when it comes to patient data that comes from being that community. So for me, public interest is those 4 pillars, and part of what we're working on in the summit is an agreement that those are the 4 pillars, and then we'll get very practical.
Thank you. So let's go to the summit then. So what's the French government? What are they hoping to achieve through the summit?
So I'll say a thing that sounds like a politician, which I'm not. But so I don't work for the French government. I think I'm part of the core summit team. One of the really exciting ways of running the summit is it is this hybrid. So we have a handful of envoys to the summit. Apart from one, none of them directly work for the government. So it's a public-private approach from that perspective. Our approach, so the team running the summits, is, I think, really three things. One of them is being very concrete, so it's an action summit. We want to ship, we want to build, we want to deliver. And we want to do that in three areas. The first one, and I'll talk more about it in a second, is on public interest AI. So it's developing and launching a major AI foundation for public interest, working on the 4 bricks that I just mentioned, global level. That's the first one. The second one will be on that critical link between AI and sustainability. So the climate, but also the impact of AI in nature, so including water. That'll be a second piece. And the third piece will be on global governance, the continuation of the work that's been done at Bletchley.
And how's the summit going to work in practice? Kind of what's the approach to trying to build actual kind of consensus around these issues?
So, okay, 2 answers to that, like how it's been working, and it's now about 8 working weeks roughly to the summit. So the summit is on February 10th and 11th. It'll be held in Paris at the Grand Palais in central Paris. We have been, I hope I can say we've been highly consultative. So each one, there are 5 tracks for the summit. The deliverables will be cross-cutting, but there are 5 tracks. Public interest is one of them. Labor is another. Innovation is another. Global governance. For each one, and then trust and safety. For each one of the different tracks, we've developed working groups, and the working groups bring together other governments, corporates, and civil society. So on the public interest working group, contact group or working group, I have anywhere between 150 and 250 organizations attending on a monthly basis. So we've been asking them for their views at the beginning, what does the problem look like? What do we think we could do to help? And then bouncing back ideas for deliverables with them. So that's been the process to date. Running up to the actual days. So there'll be 4 days in the run up to the summit, 2 days sort of academic days focusing on cutting edge research in AI, 2 days on the cultural side of AI, and then the actual summit followed by a business day afterwards. It'll be, in terms of scale, we're looking at between 1,000 and 2,000 people invited on the February. So it'll be a sort of a slightly larger scale in terms of the event itself, and then a head of state day on the Tuesday morning, the 11th.
And I love the way that it's been built in a way that's sort of you're really trying to engage a big and broad kind of group of people and organisations. To what extent? We've been talking throughout the day. We've had a kind of theme that's come up throughout the day, which is kind of the geopolitical tensions around these issues, the way in which AI is sort of increasingly seen as as a strategic asset by nation states and so on. And to what extent are you confident that we can answer these big questions, but still engage governments on the need to be collaborative around them? Because it feels like things are fragmenting a bit and may fragment a bit more next year.
Okay, so I love that you answered that question. That's precisely the reason I started working on this at the end of last year. I think a couple of things. Part of what we're trying to do with the summit is really to kind of bend the arc, the trajectory of AI globally towards collaboration rather than competition. And that is a clear, shared goal for the entire summit team. So our focus is on that. Why do we think it matters? So speaking from the perspective of public interest, which again will be cross-cutting deliverable for the whole summit, I think we can't not have it. These are ultimately public goods, right? These are commons that we're setting up when it comes to data, when it comes to openness, and the other pieces that I mentioned. And I think it'll work, and I think it's critical because unless you're the US or you're China, we're in it together from that perspective. So I think it's really important to realize, and this is a point that I've been making to the team and to others, that the different sort of, in French you say problématique, like the approaches, the problems that we face, whether you're France or Brazil, whether you're Senegal or Indonesia, they're really similar. The data that we have is not good enough, right? We don't have the companies. We'd love to have the companies. We're interested in angles around openness. So this is what we're looking at. And I think that is something that I'm hopeful about and I think is highly achievable. And yeah, in some ways it does run a little bit against the grain of some of the conversations. But as I said, unless you're the States or China, I don't think you can adopt an approach which is really focused on your own sort of nation-state unit.
And one last question. It's in this context, the UK sort of feels sort of particularly kind of exposed in a way in terms of these big geopolitical shifts. It's a relatively small economy, literally in between two very, very large kind of economies, the US and the EU, and therefore actually participating in that broader debate could be, very, that could be a very positive place for the UK to play a role. Do you have that sense of, that the UK can and is ready to engage and to have these kind of bigger questions and play this kind of more international role?
Yeah, I do. I mean, for a couple of different reasons. I think the UK has been, for obvious reasons, a leader when it comes to AI safety and has adopted an approach which is a highly collaborative one, bringing together, just recently in San Francisco, this network of AI safety institutes. So I think the UK continuing to lean in to that collaborative aspect, I think is brilliant. And on the other hand, my hope and to some degree my understanding is at the same time as that continues, a renewed focus around AI in the public interest, I think will play really well to the assets of the UK ecosystem as a whole. So I'm French-British, I've lived here for a long time, and I've often said, and some of you have heard me say this before, like the UK ecosystem, when it comes to civil society, non-governmental organizations, universities in Europe writ large, is brilliant. Like many other organizations are here, some of them I've been fortunate enough to play a role in different ways, whether it's like Open Data Institute, Ada Lovelace, now connected by data, I see Jenny over there. I won't name all of them, but like it is such a wealth, like the tapestry in the UK is so strong that we have to use it, and I think it's imperative to use it not just for the benefit which is critical of the UK, but broadly as well.
Awesome, that's such a great point to end on, and I heartily agree in terms of just the strength and depth of the ecosystem that we've built in the UK, definitely feels like time to use it. Martin, thank you very much. Hopefully that's been a really useful insight into what's going to be quite an important event in about 8 weeks' time. Martin, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, and if you'd like to join me in thanking Martin.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.